Pine hui. Welcome to the Infrastructure and Environment Committee for the 5th of July 2023. Welcome to those who are watching via live stream and those that are joining us in the Council chamber today. We also have Councillor Brown on Zoom. Good morning, Councillor Brown. Nice to see you. Can I just ask that your councillors turn off their phones and pop them away until later so that we can check our messages in the break. And there should be morning tea at the conclusion of the meeting before we go into other business. So I'd just like to start the day and invite Councillor Lee to say a karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am borrowing this morning's karakia from Parliament. Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this committee with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility for the welfare and peace of Rotorua. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I'd now like to call for apologies, please. I do have an apology from Councillor Kiriopa and Councillor Patterson. Are there any other apologies? There appear to be none. I'd like to move in a seconder for the motion that the apologies from Councillor Patterson and Councillor Kiriopa be accepted, please. Councillor Councillor Maxwell and Councillor Kaifong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. We'll move on to the urgent items that are not on the agenda. Are there any urgent items? There appear to be none, but I do have one. It is a petition. It's a petition to the Council to consider the permanent closure of the walkway between Mauritius Road and Phillip Street. The reason that I'm bringing it as an urgent item is that although the petition was received in sufficient time, the agenda had already been published online, and so we didn't have a chance to insert it into the agenda. And I thought that since the reason that it's not waiting for a future meeting is that we'd like to deal with it in a timely manner, and rather than wait for another month for the next meeting. I would like to just make it clear that in accepting this urgent item, that we can discuss the matter at this meeting, but no resolution or decision can be made at this meeting. So with no further ado, I would like to acknowledge the petition from Sandra Bristow that the Council consider the permanent closure of the walkway between Mauritius Road and Phillip Street. And I'd like to ask Sandra to come forward and have a seat, and she would like to speak to her petition. And Sandra, you are welcome to speak for 5 minutes if you would like. And at the conclusion, Sandra said she's happy to answer any questions that the councillors might have, and then we will have discussion after that. Welcome, Sandra.
Welcome. Wow, I didn't expect an audience like this.
The floor is yours.
Oh, wow. The reason I have put this petition forward is because of the intimidation through the alleyway of some of our older residents in Phillip Street. I've lived in Phillip Street for 23 years. I was the I was the neighbourhood support coordinator for 10 years, so I know a fair bit about our street. The police know a fair bit about me because they used to deal with me quite often. Recently, one of our elderly neighbours, he's 90, lives on his own in his own home on the side of the alleyway, and he had a piece of wood from his fence thrown at his glass back door, didn't break it, gave him an awful fright, and within a couple of days he had the side of his house graffitied. It's a brick house, so it won't come off. But the thing that concerned me was the fact that he was so afraid, very afraid of what might happen in the night. And it's not the first time he's had a rock thrown through his back door, possibly a year ago. broke it, and he was standing right where the rock came through his window. He is an old man who stays at home all the time, on his computer, unoffensive, and I just feel that he is being intimidated and it's unacceptable. So I went to the police, talked with them about it, and they didn't suggest I do a petition. They suggested some other things which weren't terribly helpful. So I got the petition going and then found that there were 2 other people in our street, elderly. One lady who used to go to the supermarket every day on her walker through the alleyway had become so afraid that she wouldn't do that. Her son had to come and get her groceries for her. And another lady said, I'm just not going through the alleyway, I'm going to get my groceries online. And it really was a picture to me of the fear that is in our older people who own their own homes and have lived there for a long time in our street. When I've discussed this with residents when I was neighbourhood support coordinator, they said, oh, you know, they've got to have it for their children going to Malfoy School. And I understood that. There were a lot of children who used to go through the alleyway. However, while I was doing the petition, I observed from my house how many children, and there were between 4 and 10 children used that alleyway morning and afternoon, where there used to be heaps of kids. There used to be a lot of parents who would come and park in our street and drop their children off and wait for them in the afternoon. This is now down to 2 cars. So the school, to me, is not an issue. The motel at the end of the Malfoy Road end of the alleyway took in the homeless when that all happened, and that created a huge amount of problems. The police were in our street all the time. That has eased off. But we've had, you know, tyres slashed and all manner of problems, thefts and just malicious damage. So I did a petition because I just don't see the necessity for that alleyway. There's plenty of other streets that people can go to the supermarket and that there are basically no children in our street at this time who might use the alleyway to go to school. There used to be, but there isn't now. So, yeah, because of the fear of people who've lived there for years, I just think it is not necessary to have it.
Thank you. Thank you for your feedback and for bringing it to our attention how it's affecting the people that are living in your neighbourhood. I'd like to ask if the councillors have got any questions for Sandra. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned that the motel next door had previously been a source of troubles. So what's the current status of
Well,
that?
we don't seem to have, I haven't been spoken to them or anything, but it seems to have quietened down in the last 6 months.
So where do you think the troublemakers are coming from?
Not quite sure. When he had his the wood from his fence, which they had broken a panel and he had to get replaced. When that happened, he went to the door, saw the piece of wood on his doorstep, and heard children laughing and running down the alleyway towards Malfoy. So whether they're coming through from there or not, I do not know. We had an incident very recently where children outside the next door neighbour's house from me were throwing glass on the road, and my neighbour went out and said to them, "You clean that up." Anyway, I went out to sort of protect her because I thought this was not good. There was about 4 kids. I said, "Why aren't you children at school?" Because they were obviously school-aged children. And they said, "We're too naughty to go to school." I had never heard a comment like that before. So I spoke to an elder girl and she said, yeah, the schools don't want them. So they're there in our streets, smashing glass. The alleyway has always been an issue with rubbish and glass and, yeah, all manner of things. And I know that the council has received photos because my neighbour said, this is what I went down and showed the council today about all the rubbish that goes into the alleyway. I don't know if they're coming through from Malfoy. I don't think they're coming through from Phillip Street. Not quite sure about that. But I think that they are more the younger children, but I can't confirm that. But neighbours have said, oh, there was these kids there, they were about 16 or 17, you know, and they had bottles and...
Thank you.
Yeah, when I was neighbourhood support coordinator, I used to go through the alleyway every rubbish day and clean up all the mess and put it in the rubbish. I don't do it now. It's not for any other reason, but I think, actually, I can't be bothered. It's not my job. But the alleyway is always a mess with the long grass and everything. And that would be an issue, as far as I'm concerned, if we were to close it down.
Thank you, Sandra. There's a few more questions that are lined up here in front of us, so maybe I'll just move on to those if that's okay with you.
Yes, fine.
Did you get the answer you needed there, Councillor Lee?
Just one more question, if I may.
Quickly.
Would you be able to refresh my memory? Was this one of the alleyways that Tracy McLeod worked on tidying up over Christmas? It was. Okay.
That's a yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. And thank you very much, Sandra, for presenting this petition and being here in person. I know there's a number of questions, so I'll keep it short, but I want to assure you that community safety is a top priority of this council. We have been working hard to find ways to make our Rotorua district safer, in particular in the central area. Do you think that the social issues that you're seeing in this alleyway have been an issue around the neighbourhood in general, or is this just a targeted issue on that alleyway itself?
There has been a lot of damage done on Phillip Street, but the alleyway is constant stuff.
Thank you very much. We are exploring better solutions as a council to support, but we're also working alongside our police in partnership, and I have been advocating with ministers and the Prime Minister to ensure that the Rotorua is getting more resourcing around community safety. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morning, Sandra.
Good morning.
And before I ask my question, thank you for the mahi you've been doing with Neighbourhood Watch.
Support.
Neighbourhood support. I'm glad we've been given a bit of time to have a look at it, because always in the past I've take these requests seriously. But they're in place for a good reason. Those who can take their children to school by car are probably not the ones who cause the problem, but the not so wealthy do value the walkways to go through. The question I had was, have you been in discussion at all with that long-standing school, Malfoy?
Yes, I have. At one stage, there was so much trouble in the alleyway and in the end of the street with children fighting and one thing and another. And I used to go to the school, and because they've got signs up about all the good things they teach their children, well, sorry, it's not happening outside the school. And so the councillor who was there at the time used to come and hide in the bushes in the street to catch these children, and that was marvellous. He was a good guy, but the children got to know where he would be hiding, and so they behaved themselves. So, but he left, and so once again, the problems. I've seen. They don't look like children, but they're intermediate, so they have some big kids. They come through the alleyway and they have real fisticuffs out in the circle, and I've rung the police on many occasions, and yeah, I just feel sorry for the police actually.
Thank you. Councillor Waru.
No, I don't need to ask one. Thank you, Madam Chair. Councillor Maxwell asked my question, but just wanted to me, kia koe, it's thank you for taking the opportunity to put your kōrero forward. And yes, like Councillor Maxwell, we take these things seriously, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any further questions for Sandra? It appears that the councillors have asked all their questions, so you're welcome to take a seat back in the gallery if you like. And I will just open up if anyone's got any further comments or discussion around this item, just briefly. Thank you, Sandra. Now I've just been made aware that I need to actually have a mover and a seconder to receive this petition. Thank you, Una. Moved by Mayor Tapsell, seconded by Councillor Wang. All those in favour? Against? Thank you. Thank you for that. Any other further comments? So it's a situation that probably needs a little bit further looking into, and we will be hearing very shortly in the next week or so about a community safety plan. But with regards to this, it's a matter that is covered by various Local Government Act rules and regulations. Anytime you consider moving a road or a walkway, there are things that we need to do as a council, and we also need to be mindful of the district plans, reasons for having the walkways there. As was mentioned, they're used for people to walk to school with their children and those kinds of things. But we do take on board what you've been saying, because there are definite concerns from your community, and we thank you and the 29 people who signed that petition for raising it to our attention. If there's an appetite, perhaps we could ask staff to prepare some more information around this walkway, perhaps maybe in the first instance, some mitigations that could be put in place. I don't know what the feeling of the room is. And thank you. Yes, Mayor Tapsell.
Thank you. I think certainly in response to Sandra and that community, that would be wonderful, but also if we could consider that in the wider context of community safety and public spaces and how we as council are ensuring that they are safe. And I also do look forward to providing more information to the community on that community safety strategy that we talk about. So we are very aware of this, but if that could be a focus, we'll use it as an opportunity to focus on all areas of the community too.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. All right, well, we put that down as an action point to go forward, and we will get back probably at one of the subsequent meetings of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee and let you know what we come up with. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for doing it.
You're welcome.
23 years has been a long time chewing over the subject.
Indeed. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll now move on to the confirmation of the minutes. I'd like to ask for a mover, this is on page 7 of your agenda. I'd like to ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that the minutes of the Infrastructure and Environment Committee meeting held on the 7th of June 2023 be confirmed as a true and correct record. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Warru, and a seconder, Councillor Kai Fong. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Next on the agenda on page 12 and is our staff reports. The first report is the Community Wellbeing and Active Engaged Communities Progress Report. I'd just like to ask for a mover and a seconder for the motion that the report, Community Wellbeing, Active and Engaged Communities Progress Report be received. Thank you to Councillor Kai Fong. Seconded by Councillor O'Brien. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you, Anaru and Rob. We look forward to your presentation.
Morena, through you, Madam Chair, Morena koutou. If I can take the report as read, but if I can just say, regards to Ms Bristow's presentation just recently, yesterday I did contact the police in regards to that particular walkway, so that we can work together in regards to what that might look like. Equally, Rob through our team has our team's going out to do an inspection of that particular walkway to gather us more information. So to your point in regards to bringing something back to council, we've got some stuff already underway. If I can just talk, I'm going to talk very briefly to Baxendale, the Esplanade. So we've heard the concerns from submitters, including the ongoing work for development. Post-consultation report back to council in September will occur on next steps. The only other thing we wanted to bring to your attention now was we haven't spoken to you about the Tarawera landing, and in particular the history of the Tarawera landing and the current update in regards to where the project is. And so with that in mind, I've asked Rob to give you the history of the Tarawera landing, and in particular what it was to what it is now, and then we'll answer any questions from you as well in regards to our report.
Thank you, Rob.
Kia ora, councillors, and thank you through you, Madam Chair. The Tarawera landing, for those of you, hopefully most of you have been out there. It's a significant area for Rotorua. It was the home of tourism to the pink and white terraces. Very significant piece of whenua to Tuarangi. The situation out there is that over an extended period of time, the infrastructure there had got to a point where it was certainly not befitting of the history and its location. And so in about 2020, we went through a process with Tuarangi and users on a plan to upgrade the Tarawera landing. We put forward a bid to the Tourism Infrastructure Fund at the time, and for a raft of jobs that needed to be done out there, and Tourism Infrastructure were supportive of parts of the work that we were planning. They did have a very tourism-related funding envelope, and some of the improvements there were sort of just a bit wider than tourism. So we went through a design and build process for that and upgraded a significant amount of the infrastructure. The total project cost all up was about $970,000, of which around $300,000 of that came from the Tourism Infrastructure Fund. We did a major upgrade to the toilet block out there, so which is a pretty large toilet block. It's a very popular site. We also tidied up the whole lake edge with boardwalks, the retaining wall that was there, car park was done, the jetty and the boat ramp were moved. A significant problem we had out there was the interaction between swimmers and beach users and boats, so they were reorientated to keep boats to one side of the jetty and swimmers and other beach users to the other side of the jetty. We also did a lot of work on stormwater and the landscape and planting and parking areas out there. Historically, the stormwater management out there was quite 1950s rudimentary. There were puna and significant springs out there, so in the process of redoing that, the puna was separated from sealed stormwater areas, and so there was quite a lot of cultural work that was done out there. During the upgrade, we had a COVID situation as well, and we have a pretty limited time window of when we can actually do work around the lakes and the water. We need to fit around summer peak season use, dab chick breeding, trout spawning, and so the window is reasonably short, so we missed the autumn window, and the consequence of that is the project took longer than we'd hoped, and we ended up finishing the wet work, if we call it that, in the springtime. So it was all ready for last October. It's had this autumn planting completed, and the last piece of work we need to do is install a swimming platform, which will go in in the springtime, so that we've got a good user area for people in the summer. So this was a big project for a lakes infrastructure project. It had some fairly significant constraints on it around the Lakes A zone and what we could do, as well as working in the water. But it's been a very good outcome, and we're hoping that it's going to continue to present the photo opportunities that it has for many years, and is going to keep looking better. So happy to take any questions on that or other aspects of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Do the councillors have any questions? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just like to pop back to the Baxendale Esplanade to start with. Engagement with local iwi has shown strong support for ecological enhancement and the provision of some access to the stream for swimming. Excuse my ignorance, who's the relevant local iwi?
Yeah, excuse me. You've got me on that. I mean,
Gina might like to help out.
yeah. There's part of a group working on the whole river. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
We're just waiting for Gina's response.
Sorry. Yeah.
In the specific area, well, along the entire Utuhina, there are 2 iwi with interests. At the top of the Utuhina, it is Ngāti Kia, Ngāti Tuara. They also have interest in the Tārewa Road area. And then for, I'm not completely sure what the boundaries are, Ngāti Whakauwi haven't given us the complete boundaries, but at least within the Pukeroa Whata block, it is primarily Ngāti Whakauwi. So we generally work with both iwi. They work out between them who has the primary interest. So we generally would notify both, and then they would tell us who's the most important concerns to be worried about. Sometimes they both have concerns and we have to work with them both to resolve those.
Thanks, Gina.
Just as a suggestion, in the interests of transparency, it would probably be helpful if we could have the relevant groups identified in these reports. So that would be helpful. Switching to Tarawera, am I correct that that work was intended to be completed by May last year?
In the original proposal, yes, we had intended to complete it by May last year, but we worked with the contractor on design and build, so the work didn't actually, it did start in January, but we missed that May snapshot on lake closure, because the lake's closed for work from May through to September. So we missed May because we had a period of COVID lockdown. And we didn't get the jetty built before the trout fishing season. So the jetty had to be finished prior to the start of the trout fishing season in September, and the final ceiling of the car park couldn't be completed until about November because of the weather conditions.
So is it all completed now?
Yes, it's all completed apart from the installation of the swimming platform.
Right. Okay. Has the owner of the Tarawera, who was responsible for the work? Because I understand there have been some disruptions to that business. So who was ultimately responsible for carrying out all that work?
Well, it was a council contracted job. Yep. So we worked with the owner of the business through that period with a number of mitigations for the business to be able to continue. It was affected by the COVID situation as well. So much like with the lakefront, we had a rent holiday, and we have carried on a number of factors through there to help that business through that period. And the staging of the work was done in such a way to try and always be able to provide some opportunity for use of the site. So it was actually staged over a period of time rather than completely closed to all users, so that there could be some opportunity for the business to continue.
Okay. So what's the status of the lease at present with the leaseholder?
I think they would stick to the matters that are in the report. Is that, or do you want us to answer that question?
The lease, I'm happy to answer that question. Yeah, I mean, the lease it's under the reserve management plan. The lease has a period running through till the end of this year, and we're currently working with Tuarangi and the tenant on what's going to happen for the future of that lease.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waru.
Tēnā koe te hea mana. Morena no kōrua. Just a couple of questions. The Quito Park trial road closure. So just wanted to ask, has there, I know it says you're looking for feedback on that, but has there been any noticeable I suppose, improvement in the things that were, you know, all the damage that was happening to now?
Yes, there's been a significant improvement in the condition of that part of the park. Winter time was the favourite time, when it's nice and wet and it's a good place to go and create mayhem. And with that closure, we've had a very successful winter and actually had no restoration work that we've had to do.
And if I can add to that, Councillor Waru, there's been overwhelming support for that road to be closed, including with the marae.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear, because it was just really, you know, it was in a bad way when we had people going through there just wanting to be a hoon, I suppose. So kai te mea atu kia kōrua. Lake erosion. So, you know, I've read it through. Is there any sort of plan to work with the regional council or put them on notice or something like that to deal with that? Otherwise we're going to be forever dealing with erosion. Is that a question I can ask now?
Yes, possibly it might be answered best by Stavros. Are you happy to give us?
Oh, I can wait till...
We might wait till the next report, if that's okay.
Kia ora. And one last question was around the whakariwerewa, the Forest Loop Great Ride app. It's up and running. What's the feedback been on that? Has it been getting good use?
I haven't been able to get the metrics, which we should be able to get, actually how many downloads and how much it's being used. I've personally got it and had pretty good fun with it. And from what I've heard from the few other users that have used it, it's added a significant amount of value to the loop. It's something that no other great ride has, and it really, with the context of the cultural stories around the loop, it's going to be a great asset.
Well, kia ora. I look forward to seeing the data when it comes in next week. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Waru. Are there any further questions, councillors? It appears there be none. Thank you, gentlemen, for your report. We appreciate all the information that was contained in it, and just the overview of Rotorua Landing was very helpful. Showed all the challenges that's been faced in that project, which has been significant, and the work that's been done to try and mitigate that with the business that is concerned there. I'd like to now move on to the second staff report of the day on page 16 of your
Sorry,
agenda.
Madam Chair, will there be any time for discussion on that item? Comments?
Did you have something you specifically want to raise?
Oh yeah, because we've done questions, so it was...
You're well, yeah, we have probably got a bit of time to have discussion.
Okay,
Yep.
just quickly, I just want to commend the kaupapa out at Tarawera. It's been long overdue. It is a he wahi, tapu tērā wahi. It's a special place, so I'm glad it's been given the treatment that it deserves. So, kai te miha ki te kaunihera and all those involved to make that happen. Long time coming, but it's here. Kia ora.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else would like to add? Councillor Lee?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to acknowledge that the whole process has been disruptive for the leaseholder out there, and I understand it has hurt him in the back pocket. So it hasn't been without its issues.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. I'm sure the staff and the contractors involved did their absolute best to try and mitigate that as best as possible. Any other further discussion? Yes, Councillor Bryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through the Chair, I'd just like to acknowledge and support what Councillor Lee has said. I myself, I appreciate the COVID situation, and I congratulate the team on the design work that's been done out at Tarawera. But I do have to say, on at least 3 to 5 occasions on fine weather days, I was down there was no work going on, and large portions of the entire area were closed off for significant periods. And the only reason I know this is because locals had been in touch with me, and I went down to see for myself. So although I congratulate the team on the design work, I think the actual project management and delivery side, there are probably lessons for the future. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and taken on board. Is there anything else that people would like to talk about today? Thank you. There does appear to be none. So we'll move on to the next staff report, which is the Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions Progress Report on page 16 of the agenda. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the motion that the Infrastructure and Environmental Solutions Progress Report be received? Councillor Wang and Councillor Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. And I'd like to invite Stavros to present his presentation, please.
To extend our respects to one of our colleagues, Brendan Keith, who passed away prematurely last week. His funeral is later on today. Brendan Keith, Councillor Maxwell. Brendan was too young to pass away, so Brendan has been a member of our extended whānau, and we're really devastated by his passing away. So we'll have his funeral later on today, and most of us will attend today. Second thing, I wanted to introduce Eric Cott to my left. Eric has almost 40 years of experience in operations services of the council, and Eric's primary responsibility is to manage our infrastructure networks. The three key objectives of his existence are to maintain safe, reliable and stable services for our communities. As I've said earlier, our infrastructure group comprises four main teams. One undertakes forward planning for our future. We have our operations network, who manages the service reliability of all our services, our environmental monitoring, and our civil defense and emergency readiness for the community. Today, I take the report, my report is read, and I will be more than happy to take any questions, related to that, progress reports. But also would like the opportunity to have two presentations. One is about our water supplies. I'm conscious of the fact that over the next few months, elected members will be undergoing the long-term planning process. And I think it's quite important as we progress through our these monthly reports to gradually introduce the key elements of the services. So by the time you come to consider the long-term planning, you would be as familiar as possible with the services, so you are able to make informed decisions and considerations during that process. The second presentation we'll have today is an update with regards to an inquiry raised by Councillor O'Brien, I think last few days a week, about the Minister's decision to reverse his early decision about the allocation of funds for the Rotorua sewage reticulation projects, and I'll provide a presentation to that respect. So I will start with our water supplies, and I will try to be as succinct as possible, but at the end of the presentation, I'll be more than happy to take any questions you may have with regards to these services. Water supplies obviously are a critical component, in my opinion, from a professional perspective, or the community's perspective. The water supplies together with water management are the two most critical services local government provides to their communities, and their objectives obviously is to ensure the health and protect the environment, and obviously through the provision of water supplies to enable economic development and cater for our current and future housing needs. As many other aspects of our services, we do need to have a balanced approach where we have to balance the availability or supply of those resources, weigh up the current future demands, provide an appropriate and responsible stewardship for the health and well-being of our communities, and obviously be cognizant of the fact that money is always under constraint, and we need to make sure that the cost of the services are affordable to our communities. The national policy framework that guides a lot of these services provide a hierarchy of use, and in recent iteration of the national policy statement, it allocates as a matter of priority a care for the environment, the municipal or the residential needs of the community, and the commercial sector. So we're making water allocation, that hierarchy needs to be evident and demonstrated in our decision making. Again, based on that balanced use of hierarchy, we are tasked to look for optimum options and optimum balance in approaches. But the factors that are influencing our future planning are always and will always remain the safe use of water. And again, I need to remind everyone about the Havelock North situation. And if you look at the national level, there are somewhere in the region of 6,500 infections related to potable water supplies across the whole country every year. And obviously we have a significant responsibility to protect the safety of our community. The reliable services, the reliability of the services, obviously people and the community rightfully expect when they turn their tap, they want to have a shower, they want to cook, they want to do their domestic chores, they have reliable access to this kind of services. That's not under question. And obviously having a stable network onto which the services are founded on are a very important component of our asset thinking, asset management thinking. Where do repairs, what do we do renewals, what do we do reactive repairs, proactive repairs and upgrades. The stability of the network are very important in influencing our future strategies for this. And again, this is a schematic presentation of our current networks at a high level view. You see the various colors. I think probably is not really sort of conducive to, to detail attention the way it's presented there, but you can see around the lake we've got a number of supplies, and all the supplies are catered by interconnected but distinctly managed zones and networks. Some key points about water utilization and demands. Rotorua District Council district area has about 2,500 square kilometers. Our average rainfall is somewhere in the region of 1.4 meters per year. That produces about 3.8 billion cubic meters of rainfall a year. And our lakes store somewhere in the region of 5 billion cubic meters of water. So we've got plenty of water in Rotorua. The municipal use of that rainfall, that water, falling onto the land is about 15 million cubic meters per year and represents roughly about 0.3% of the annual rainfall. So we are not really excessively use that resource. Of that 0.3%, 50% by the average person is used to water gardens, cars, washing houses, and so on. Immediately is returned back into the land, which eventually finds its way back into natural environment. The other 50% is what we call wastewater, black water or grey water, that is captured, conveyed and treated to a treatment plant before it's released back into the environment again. So the natural cycle is completed. We take water that falls from the sky, we use it, we satisfy our needs and necessities, and the whole cycle is completed again. So in terms of quantities, we have a lot of water in the area. The average use per person per day in Rotorua is about 320 litres per day. When you compare it at the national level, it's slightly above the national, a median average, about 15% above the average. But when you calibrate it against the fact that the nature of our district incorporates large amounts of property, we've got a significant component of tourism, and you see in the next bullet point, the biggest users are our parks and reserves. Tourism facilities are the largest users for that water supply. All our water supplies are fully compliant with the drinking water standards, thanks to Eric's team. And obviously for the last few years, we have a stringent approach in managing compliance with those standards because it relates to health and safety of our community. Drinking water safety, again, is guided by a whole range of regulations and rules, and the new regulator, Taumata ROI, provides a whole range of guidelines. It defines the levels and types of treatment that should be employed, the level of management and monitoring that should be applied into the network, and to employ UV ultraviolet lighting for disinfection and chlorine into the system. There is a need for continuous online monitoring of the flows of the water and the presence of residual chlorine into the system to make sure that disinfection is effective and it's appropriate for the use of our community. Our assets, comprising about 9 water supply areas, including 3 urban and 9 treatment plants. We have 11 water sources and 22 storage reservoirs, about 800 kilometers of pipelines. I would like to emphasize that the network itself has got another 500 to 600 kilometers of pipes that are private pipes. You would realize from your private properties, your private supply starts at the top, at your boundary, and the average house about 20 meters of water pipes, 20 to 25 meters, so the total network comprises in excess of 1,500 kilometers of pipelines. We've got 11 main pumping stations, plus a number of other boosters that help in greenfield development and new subdivisions. We have connections, about 25,000 connections, and about 5,800 metered areas. Eric will tell you that over the years, the council has paid attention and focus onto sectorization in terms of having meters in certain zones, and the whole idea is to give us some idea about water demand and supply and identify early losses of water or unaccounted for water, and give us a balanced flow. If we extract X amount of water from our sources, how much it is used, and through this sectorization and commercial facilities metering, we know roughly where we have losses of water. Now, the replacement value of our assets for water supply is about $300 million. I'm rounding all these numbers, as best, for simplicity. And from historical terms, about 50% of those assets have exceeded their remaining their design life. So we use about just over $3 million for renewals every year, and of course that represents about 1.5% of our assets. What we do for the community every day, we provide somewhere between 30 and 40 million liters of water per day, every day, 365 days a year. So that's in a snapshot, that is what the assets, and that's what the service provided to the community. Now, to do that, the resources and structure for the service we have is that we've got a gross cost for the service of approximately $12 million a year that is funded through rates, a targeted rate for water supplies. And that is comprising operations and maintenance and repairs of about $4.5 million, energy costs to pump water through the pump station worth about $1.2 million a year, staff costs about $0.6 million, comprising about 5 FTEs that covers both forward planning, operational planning, and monitoring work. So it's not an excessive number. Looking around the district and the region, we are probably on the thinner side, much thinner side for other territorial local authorities. We have our depreciation renewal somewhere in the region of $3.5 million a year, which is, as I said earlier, comprised about 1.5% of the replacement value of our assets. We have corporate costs and capital funding costs of about $2.2 million. And out of all these costs, only about 10% of that variable relate to the use of energy and chemicals applied to make the water supply, and the balance is not volume sensitive. And the reason I'm saying that is that, and I'll come later to that, is that it's often the notion that if we reduce water consumption, our costs will reduce in pro rata in proportion to that. And the reality is different. The reality is that if we're using, for argument's sake, 20% less water than we currently use at the moment, will only affect a variable portion of our component. It will need less electricity, less chemicals, and therefore somewhere in the region of $200,000 a year will be saved a year if we had 20% less water. So that's quite important to keep in mind, because the rest of the network has to be repaired, has to be maintained, has to be renewed, and has to be monitored. So these are fixed costs. Whether you convey 100 liters per second or you convey 80 liters per second, the pipelines and the network needs to be in place. Again, the various risks you have identified in our infrastructure strategy, and we are diligently trying to address. It's disaster, interruption, earthquakes, or any natural events. And Eric and the team have made a significant progress over the years to make sure that the catchments are interconnected. If we lose supply in one area, we are able to supply it from a different area. So we have this interconnectivity of our assets and our networks. We focus attention on critical assets And obviously, every time we renew assets, we use more modern and resilient materials. And obviously, we have duplications of some areas in terms of standby generation and standby conveyance systems. So if we have interruption in some area, we supplementing it through different means. Another risk, obviously, the critical asset failure, and obviously the way to do it is to do it proactively. Is no good in addressing a critical asset after it failed. The whole point of asset management is to identify and predict as best as you can the condition of the asset and make sure you replace it or renew it or you upgrade it just before it fails so you don't experience a service interruption. And obviously another risk is that we have enough water supply to meet our current and future community needs. And as I said earlier, the sectoralization of our catchments, and the proactive management of our system, and obviously the proactive relationship building with many stakeholders to ensure we have continuity of access to sources of water, and the consented access of that water is quite important part of our forward planning. We do regularly, and I'm sure you do regularly, get inquiries, and I try to list there some examples. I'm sure these are not exhaustive, but I think they are representative of the regular inquiries we get. Our water is perfectly clean. We take it from the springs. Well, the reality is that we don't actually take water from the spring itself. We allow the spring, which emerges onto the ground, the surface through hydraulic heads, coming out of aquifers, is pooling in a particular area, and we extract water from a pooling source. We don't take water directly from the springs. Now, the ability to access water from lake storage, surface storage, is always going to be there. As I said earlier in my presentation, our combined lakes store in excess of 5 billion cubic meters of water, so we have a lot of access, to surface water. But obviously, having access to spring waters with the appropriate, collaboration of various parties is quite important, because it reduces the amount of treatment we need to do, but we still need to treat the spring water too. We already use one lake storage for water supply, the Lake Rotorua. 260 properties are supplied through a lake, storage surface, storage. Water meters, often the question is, why don't we install water meters to compel people to reduce consumption? Again, when you do the financial and business case analysis, you'll find that the capital cost and operational cost for water meters, which are roughly about $25 million for Rotorua, based on a national study done a few years ago. And again, that might be 100% accurate or not, but that's a rough order figure that it's available for us as professionals to base our business case. It will cost about $25 million to install water meters, somewhere in the region of $2 to $2.5 million per year to operate it. And then you ask the question, even if you do the maximum savings of water of 20% that people preach, that say that can be achieved, then you save about $240,000 a year in chemicals and power supply. So when you do the business case, it doesn't stack up. If you have $25 million of capital available, I can give you a whole list of other things that you could more usefully use $25 million than actually doing water meters. The other question is that, but our water is scarce, we need to protect our water. Well, it might be in some areas, but not for Rotorua. We use less than 0.3% of the rainfall, the annual rainfall. We have excessive surface storage in the lakes. It can last us for hundreds of years if we were to access it. And the climate change predictions and forecasting indicate that we're going to have increasing rainfall, increasing intensity, so we can expect a lot of more of that resource to be available to us. The question is that, can we capture it, treat it safely, convey it safely, ensure its service reliability on the ongoing basis? How are we managing our assets, in other words? Water leaks are always a problem. It is not as a critical problem as people think sometimes, except where a water leak can undermine, a property, or undermine a road, or undermine a foundation of an embankment, and so on. But it is an indication of pipelines condition, the age of the pipelines. It is not critical. when you do an economic level analysis of investment, how much you can invest into reducing water leaks to as low as possible, there are national, international studies which say that it is often not directly cost beneficial to continue to pursue reduction of water leaks when the unaccounted for water is somewhere in the region of 10 to 15%. There are studies around Europe, and I was reading a report recently where they investigate about 92 supplies in various countries. In some cases, they have unaccounted for water up to as high as 59%, and yet the benefit cost to undertake extensive leak reduction is not there because, as I said earlier, the only variable, the only effect is going to be on the variable components of your water supply. Fluoridation is coming up, or it's been compelled. There's a Health and Amendment Act in 2021. The Act requires compliance by April 2024. We have a preliminary advice from the Ministry of Health, and Eric is dealing direct with them at this point in time, which they want us to pay attention initially to the central eastern areas, and that's because of scale. The number of people living there justifies the investment into that more often. They have told us they will give us $1.6 million to cover the full cost of those capital investments, and that is subject to completing our detailed design work. We have sought some legal advice, and we'll advise you again later on about what's our responsibilities. And obviously, non-compliance with the legislation creates an offence and could cause some liabilities for us, about $200,000 or a $10,000 per day fine. As a business employing people, we have responsibilities, and the legal advice we have today, it's limited to staff handling chemicals and practice. Therefore, is it safe, how we're handling those chemicals? We have sought further detailed advice from the Ministry of Health about the potential medical risks of exceedance of fluoride into the system. I'm waiting for that advice, and that advice will be presented to you in August when we present a full report on the subject. So as I said, in August we will produce a final report to you addressing that. Again, talking about your future aspirations, the future development strategy and responsibilities for community health. We do have unarticulated areas in the district at this point in time. Some of you have been approached by members of the community asking the question. Under public health, we have to consider new community water supplies. The medical officer of health recommends that councils progressively extend supplies because they consider a municipal supply safer than actually individual private supplies. We have parts of the community like Rotorua, Rotorua, Muria, and those areas. It's about 2,000 properties from in around terms that are not really supplied by our municipal supply. They use at the moment sources roof water, like roof water, lakes, boreholes, and again the degree of safety considerations there, it varies depending on the expertise and the knowledge of people, and that's why the medical officer of health recommends extending municipal supplies. We've done a desktop assessment. We presented that again to you in the infrastructure strategy, in part of the LTP later on, and we have some examples which we analyze the unarticulated areas. We know that existing properties are the ultimate development potential is going to be, and we analyze the average daily demand or peak demands, and average flows, and that gives an indication of how much additional water we need to supply these communities. Again, the issue is not the availability of water. The issue is about extending, the supplies to these areas, and how much needs to be invested to create networks. And again, the desktop assessment indicates to satisfy all this area, probably you're looking something in the region of $40 million in the long term, to do that. And therefore, council, in its considerations, needs to assess and consider what kind of funding and revenue policies you want to apply if you want to pursue that, that avenue. Obviously, it will require some additional water source consents or potentially in a treatment plant, extracting water from a lake. The 24-54 infrastructure strategy that will be informing your financial strategy in the long-term plan will provide options and assessments for that, so you can apply your knowledge and your entitled consideration for that. Again, one of the areas that we have uncertainties at the moment is the water reforms program. As you understand, there is still uncertainty after the election what the outcome of that is going to be. We're proceeding on the basis of our current medium and long-term planning on the basis that it's business as usual for us. We have responsibilities to our communities to undertake our due diligence and to provide safe water supplies, and we continue to do so until the elections and the outcome is conveyed to us. So that's it about water supplies. I'm not sure if any question needs to be asked now, Madam Chair, or...
Would you find it easier to have the questions now, perhaps?
More than happy to do so.
Yes, Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Madam. Thanks, Stavros, for your report on that. And Eric, good to see you again. Kia ora. The question I have is, how much wiser are we with renewals, repairs in our crucial geothermal areas? I mean, Rotorua is unique. Just a straight up question.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Through you, Madam Chair. The question was, how much wiser are we? Over the years, the successive management teams have built up a lot of information about what the effect of geothermal influences are on all of our assets. So we are using a lot different materials than we did in past days. Plastics are popular. It depends. Some of our geothermal areas, as you'll know, are hot. Some are hot and gassy, and some are not gassy, are not hot but gassy. So we've got a lot more modern materials now. Fiberglass is a popular one, and it tends to be even more of an issue with our wastewater network, because that is the water supply network is under pressure, so we only have to worry about the outside corrosion on pipes. In the past, we used a lot of brass fittings, copper. Now plastic fittings are pretty much exclusively used. So that is really, it's an ongoing learning and application of the knowledge we picked up.
Yeah. And Madam Chair, just further to that, I want to say on Saturday I went out to Ngāti Rangiwewehi's Iwi Day, which was for the Taniwha Springs Pump Station. That a very successful day, and kudos to us at Rotorua Lakes Council and to our staff and the contractors, and our chair, Judge Bidwell, talked about the cooperation and talked about that, and so I wanted to express that and pass that on to our people here. Kia ora.
Thank you for your comments. Is there any other questions from Councillor Waru?
Kia ora, just seeking clarification too. Are we just asking questions around the water
just at this
issue,
stage,
and then we move into the
yes.
next? Kia ora, kapai. Okay, yes, I do have a question. So the culverts, with all the flooding and all the rain and everything like that, I'm not too sure how many we have in this area, but is it an issue? Are they getting blocked up more and more often?
Through you, Madam Chair. What we're finding is not so much blocking from the frequent constant rainfall. We're finding a lot of erosion, lakeside erosion, where the culverts enter via outlet structures. We're having problems with those being undermined, and that's creating an additional maintenance cost. when we have these, we've had a number of rain events, and I think there was a couple of photographs in the report here of areas where inlets to culverts had become blocked with debris, and that has also created a lot of work for us to go back after rain events and clear them. We do have a procedure that every time we get a heavy rain warning, our contractor goes to these sites that we're aware of, checks them prior to the rainfall, checks them after the rainfall. But certainly during those events we have had some damage.
Thank you. That was my little segue into my question that I asked earlier around working with the regional council or something to tend to that, to take care of that issue, the erosion issue, with the water, lake levels and stuff like that. What's the work being done around that?
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. You're absolutely right that the combination of weather events, especially over the last 18 months, and again going by climate change predictions that will become more and more of the norm, the Rotorua district receives somewhere in the region of 2 or 3 times the natural annual rainfall. Instead of 1.5 meters of rain, we got up to in excess of 3 point, something in the meters of water. That has had a number of effects. Thankfully, we did not have significant flooding issues in our communities. We have isolated cases, culverts, some ponding of roads and so on, and I think that's due to a lot of proactive work that the guys are doing, on before a weather, warning. One of the effects, of course, is that that the lake levels have risen. As you're aware, Lake Rotoma, Lake Rotoehu, Lake Rotoiti, Lake Rotorua are all on historical higher levels than the early 1970s. The Plant Regional Council have a view for which they say, well, there's some elements we cannot interfere with or cannot adjust at this point in time. We have agreed in the Rotorua Lakes Water Strategy Group on the 23rd of June that the partners have instructed the formation of a working party comprising of our offices, the Plant Regional Council and Rotorua Lakes Trust, to work together to take a long-term horizon view and say, well, there might be not be enough assets to control lake levels at this point in time, but take into account that climate change is predicted to create the conditions for more intense and heavy and frequent rainfalls, then we have a responsibility to our communities to identify that risk and start working together, and each respective party to undertake their statutory and operational responsibilities to mitigate those risks. As you're aware, you are spending somewhere in the region of $130 million for stormwater attenuation over the next 7 years. You are upgrading your wastewater treatment plant to cope with increased capacity. We're protecting our water supplies through these events. We try to reinforce our roading networks as best as we can. So the lakes are not directly our management responsibility, and therefore we have to work with the regional council to help them understand that they do have, as we do, regulatory, statutory, and community responsibilities to identify other asset-based or management areas of intervention that will help manage the lakes. The effects of high lake levels are multiple: erosion, increasing flood risk, increasing property damage, or increasing the level of groundwater, and those things need to be addressed. We cannot be left to chance. And that working party will be formed, and we have a meeting on the 18th or 19th of July, a preliminary meeting to develop a scope for that work, and we'll report to the strategy group in September.
Thank you, Stavros. I'm glad to hear that's in the thinking. But also, before I finish off, I just want to mihi ki tō hoa mate, the tangi you're going to this afternoon. So I just want to acknowledge your colleague. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Waru, and thank you for your explanation of the wider aspects of the relationship with Bay Community Regional Council. Mayor Tapsell, you had a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. My question is just around the unreticulated areas, and I do want to note the $40 million estimated cost will be potentially significant for this community. So just want reassurance. I understand that we will be discussing this in more detail in the infrastructure strategy to come. However, is there anything being done in the meantime, or certainly any advocacy towards government to help and assist with the funding of that cost for locals? I know that there has been a number of legislative changes. This has also come from the Ministry of Health. However, I do need to note that for our community, and whether there is even an element of private costs that's had to be fronted up, this will be significant change. So while there may be some benefits and a small amount of risk there, I am very concerned at this stage on what this impact will really be for our community.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. It is an interesting question because the three water reforms are founded on the promise that the reforms will ensure improved water safety for all the communities in the country. However, at this point in time, the government approach is to say, well, we will not provide funds for local authorities to comply with these expectations until the reforms have taken place. And it looks a bit peculiar that after the reforms, funding would be available, but before the reforms, funding is not available. We're certainly raising that paradox with them, and we'll have these conversations. The only thing I can report at this point in time is that the approach is that, well, you just have to wait for the reforms to take place, and then the money will be found. Money cannot be found to support these articulated schemes to comply, to achieve the same objectives before the reform. So I'll leave it to you to make that judgment, but certainly we will continue to advocate in that direction.
Thank you. Just to conclude that around the water presentation, I also want to acknowledge that here in Rotorua, and through the work of our staff, we have consistently met the drinking water standards in the district. I know the three waters reforms, which you've just mentioned, arose because of concerns on drinking water. However, we have not had that issue in Rotorua, and we are very lucky as a community to have such good, safe and accessible drinking water. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tapsell. Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Firstly, just wanted to say a big thank you to both you, Stavros, and Eric for the ongoing work that you guys are doing in the mitigation and adaptation to the effects of climate change as we've seen around the district and particularly around our lakes. My question was just around water fluoridation, and I'm a big supporter of introducing water fluoridation, and I'm really glad to see that the Ministry of Health had taken over the decision making on that, which I always thought should have been in their hands in the first place as a health-based decision. My question was just around you have in the presentation the final report coming to the committee next month, and the Act requires compliance by April. How big of a project would it be to implement it? You know, I guess the capital, the works that are needed to implement this, and is that enough lead-in time to ensure that compliance?
Thank you, Councillor Wang. Yes, it is a bit of a tight time frame to apply fluoridation to all our catchments, all our supplies. I think the estimate is about $33.5 million. However, the Ministry of Health said they would like to give priority to Central and Eastern districts. We already started the detailed design work, and as soon as we have the medical advice about the effects of fluoridation, and then we'll report back to you in August. And if the decision is to switch and move on, we will be able to deliver the central and eastern areas, within the time frame, of April 2024.
Thank you so much for that. And my second question was just around, we all know that fluoridated water contributes to greater oral health outcomes, to reduced tooth decay outcomes for especially our children. Did Rotorua have a natural fluoride in levels in our water, or was that kind of negligible?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Rotorua's water supplies, water sources do have a natural level of fluoride, but it is quite low. Most of them are around about 0.1 milligrams per litre. The Eastern, interestingly, is the only one that's elevated, and that's between 0.3 and 0.4 milligrams per litre. The level at which we will be required to dose is between 0.7 and 1 milligrams per litre.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the Chair, thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. Can I just ask, Stavros, in the start of your presentation, the resource consents with iwi engagement. I see we have till 2026, sorry, is that, if I read that right? If those negotiations aren't able to be concluded in time, what's plan B, please?
Well, we're going to distinguish the fact that the relationship built in with iwi is where the sources of water are situated on iwi land. And that's a cooperation and a partnership agreement to access the water through their land. We have managed, successfully today to secure the Taniwha Springs through a joint consent. So we have, agreements with Karamutakina that, will be no objection, will be no obstruction to that, by 2026. We are now working with the relevant Manawheno on the Waipa and Himo spring supplies. And again, we don't perceive any objections to that. It's going to be more around maintaining and preserving a relationship and about who owns the land around those springs, because there are historical grievances, how the land was acquired and how it's been used. But I'm not aware in any case so far that we have actually created any constraint or obstacle to us taking the municipal water supplies we required. However, having said that, to answer your theoretical question, if we need to do that, our infrastructure strategy has to have available options to extract water from a lake from alternative source. Lakes, are easier to extract water from, and therefore we need to have contingency planning available for us. We don't anticipate that to take place, and that's why we work very diligently with our partners whoever the Manawheno happens to be, to make sure we have joint objectives and maintaining those relationships. And I think there are mutual benefits arising from that. We need to preserve, and we'll continue to work in that direction. But there's always going to be alternatives through access to surface water storage.
Thank you. I'm just aware of the time.
Thank you. If I could just also touch on something Councillor Maxwell asked, but if I could just tighten up or narrow the questions, could I just ask, in particularly geothermal affected areas like Ohinimutu, Whakarewarewa, Glenholme, parts of Glenholme, for example, where there's more, shall we say, environmental effects, is there increased testing? Because I've had many people in those areas say to me that pipe breakdowns occur much more, that the temperature regulation is a lot harder compared to other places in Rotorua. Is there an actual effect or a plan in place to assure those people that their water quality but also the infrastructure is suffice? Thank you.
When we develop our asset management plans, we take into account number of factors, including criticality and age of pipes, the environment in which they're situated. So yes, we do know that pipes and some types of pipes in those areas have a shorter lifetime. So we plan renew those. They'll be planned to be renewed more frequently. As far as water quality goes, we're not actually aware of any risk to declined water quality. We supply the water, we test right throughout the network as well as at the treatment plant. We always consistently achieve our residual of chlorine in those areas. So as far as water quality goes, I think everyone that's receiving water from our network can be assured that the risk of any lowering of quality is extremely low, and probably no different in those areas to anywhere else. What we do find is from time to time is that people having problems on just a few households with warm water when they would prefer to have cold water, and that is just solely related to the temperature transfer. But as far as the integrity of the pipes, we're fully confident in those areas.
Thank you, Eric. I'm just aware of the time. We have got time pressures on us this morning, so I'll just take one final question, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the wide-ranging report. I actually have a number of questions prepared. Prioritising them, I suppose. Let's start with the wastewater treatment plant upgrade. So you say in your report here that work continues with Mana Whenua to identify a discharge point for reduced forest footprint. Can you tell us who the Mana Whenua are, please?
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Ngāti Tuhurangi, Ngāti Whakaui, and I think there are a number of the subgroups at Trust represented that, but the broad Mana Whenua groups are Ngāti Tuhurangi and Ngāti Whakaui. Okay.
Do I understand correctly that a previous group of Mana Whenua were supportive of the discharge from the sewage treatment plant going into Lake Rotorua around the sulphur area?
It's quite correct. A few years ago, a technical advisory group comprising a number of Mana Whenua who were involved into the process reached the conclusion that a land contact process adjacent to the treatment plant would have been acceptable, and the resource consent application was prepared for the Environment Court to that effect. Unfortunately, some Mana Whenua, especially on the eastern side, raised objections to that, and an agreement was reached between Mana Whenua landowners where they withdrew the support for discharging near the lake, and therefore we were compelled to work on an alternative plan from irrigation into a more constrained party into CNI in the forest, because the Mana Whenua involved in that area accepted they would be agreeable for them to continue discharge into the forest in a much reduced area. So the question arose as to whether would have been a successful application of the Environment Court or not without the agreement or the consent of the landowners, and the decision was made that it would not have been feasible to get an Environment Court decision in favour of discharging near the lake if the landowners were objecting to it.
Okay. So when you say Ngāti Whakaui, are you referring to the Pukira Orowhata Trust?
Actually, just I'll interrupt just for a second. I think Gina wanted to make some comments previous, obviously, to answer.
Okay. I agree with everything that Stavros has said. Just one nuance that I wanted to correct is that when we had that community stakeholder group that was developing the original option, which went out into the lake, the particular hapu most affected had consistently signalled that they were not in support of that option. However, their representative took a different view. So it was a very complex situation we were in, but I do want to note that although other hapu and iwi were in support, the particular group closest to the discharge point had consistently expressed concerns about that. And so that's why there was significant concern if we went through a consenting process, particularly when the Rotorua Lakes Trust was supporting them. And the discharge would have been across Talt land, so that also raised a concern. But I just wanted to just make the point that it had not been a unanimously supported proposal to discharge at that particular point, and there was significant litigation risk in proceeding with the consent.
Is it fair to say that mana whenua exercise some level of veto rights over where the water is distributed?
No, the established Environment Court case law is that there is no veto. However, given the legislation, what the court will look at is who is affected and how have we addressed the impact on that particular group. So it's not necessarily about whether they agree or disagree, it's the substance of the concerns. And the view of our legal team was that there wasn't enough to demonstrate that we had addressed the substance of that particular hapu's concerns, particularly given Talt's support and the fact that it was crossing their land.
Thank you, Gina. It's a complex topic that has been through vigorous discussion and obviously advice. Is there any further questions around that, Councillor Lee? Because we just need, I'm aware of the time and we do need to
Not on that topic, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
But I do have some other questions if...
Can we make it brief, because we've still got a presentation around the funding issue as well. So please go ahead, but briefly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switching to the Tarawera reticulation scheme, you say here the local community continue to seek further cost support for scheme with some exploring legal avenues. Are you able to give us an update on that aspect at all?
I don't really want to make any comment about how the community undertakes exploration or funding support, because really is not something that I'm involved into. I'm aware that they're exploring options. I'd rather not to get engaged into the options they explore. I'd rather focus on to my responsibilities as a council officer, for which I've been instructed to give effect to a reticulation scheme following consultation, and I'll stay to attune to the expectations of that community and this council that that reticulation needs to be done at the lowest possible costs, in order to burden the local community as low as possible. Now, if there are going to be different funding and different cost support arrangements, that is something that is outside the scope of my brief at this point in time. I'm aware the community is exploring options, but I don't really get involved into it.
Thank you, Stavros. That's clarified that, and there will be more information coming along as we go through the process of procurement. And any final questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
One final question.
No, I'm done.
You're done. Thank you. Appreciate your questions. Stavros, you have some more information to share with us regarding the funding. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor O'Brien sought some updates onto the recent minister's decision about reversing this early decision, and I think it's necessary to go through a how do we do that, Aisa?
Just give us a minute to share the screen.
Oh, okay, sorry, okay. To give a little bit of a background to this, to this process, because sometimes, the dealing with a particular action or issue, it needs to be put into the context of why there has been a program of works. Thank you. Right. I'm aware of your time. So again, as a context, the Rotorua Lakes Council, Bay of Plenty Regional Council, and Rotorua Lakes Trust have entered into a deed funding with the Crown back in 2005. And that funding was dedicated to 4 targeted lakes: Lake Rotorua, Lake Rotoiti, Lake Rotoehu, and Okareka. That funding was allocated by the Crown about $72 million, and was split initially on a ratio between the Bay of Plenty Regional Council and the Rotorua Lakes Council. The Rotorua Lakes Council was allocated an amount of money, for which that would be representing 50% of the actual cost of sewage reticulation projects. Now, between 2005 and 2002, the Rotorua Lakes Council has undertaken diligently an execution of all these reticulation projects. It will deliver about almost 2,500 properties. And within the delivery of these reticulation projects, we created capacity for future demand for another 1,500 properties. The net effect of the reticulation was an immediate, sustainable, and effective diversion of somewhere in the region of 2.5 million litres of untreated wastewater from entering the lakes. Once you reticulate an area, the effect is immediate and sustainable. There's no debate about this. As I said, as of today, 2.5 million litres of wastewater do not enter the lake each day. The broad indicative metrics for that is that we're going to create isolation of harmful material like that exists in wastewater from entering the lakes, and we have completed the reticulation of Lake Rotorua around Lake Okareka and West Rotoiti, and Rotoma and East Rotoiti are in the final stages at the moment. I want you to know that Rotoma was not funded or supported by the Crown did. It was supported by the Ministry of Health. And the reason for that is that, as I said earlier, we're extracting potable water for Rotoma from the lake, and therefore the Ministry of Health supported that Rotoma reticulation. We have agreed to a program in 2005-2006 under the deeds, and we agreed to complete these programs by this year, 22-23 roughly. Over the years, in the individual scheme cost variances, there were variances, or Okareka cost less than Hamurana or East Rotoiti, and this West Rotoiti, and there are specific local issues and reasons for that. However, what you need to know that the historical average of gross cost for reticulation is about $35,000 per property. Now, it's important to note that the historical average, if you normalize those historical costs today, it probably take into account the cost of inflation, today's dollars, the historical average probably is about $47,000 per property. Now, there are continuously over that period of time between 2005 and today, there are escalating cost of price indices. Consent conditions are changing, and the market, the sector is changing too. When you go to tenders, the cost of materials and cost of labor are increasing too. So these are just a rough brush indication of what reticulations have cost. When it comes to East Rotoiti, on the blue line to the right goes all the way to Rotoma. It's another 18 kilometers of of pipelines going towards Rotoma. I think Owen Roads was the road to the Manawahi, but a little bit of East Manawahi. That's the boundaries of what East Rotoiti is. These are main pipes collecting wastewater from all these old septic tanks, and they convert into a wastewater treatment plant above the Emery store, which you can see in front of you. It was completed in 2020 and commissioned in 2020. And that is up the hills, on the hills above the Emery store. A quick summary of the history of the East Rotoiti scheme. It was entered into the reticulation program in 2005. It was agreed by the partners in the strategy group, and an initial allocation was gradually given from the Crown funding on the basis of the then estimated costs. An initial attempt was made to create a reticulation scheme in that area in 2012 and failed in the environment courts and the costs incurred by those applications, and preliminary work was abortive. The Environment Court decided, and the judge decided that the council all the time did not proceed diligently through a meaningful intention to consult with iwi in that area, and the Environment Court rejected that application. By 2014, a new Rotoiti-Rotoma sewage scheme proposal was constructed through a new reference group involving local communities, local mana whenua, and a number of external parties, including the Regional Council, the Ministry of the Environment, and Ministry of Health, and other components. In late 2014, a proposal was presented to the Council on the basis that it's going to be a new combined scheme linking Rotoma and Rotoiti together and treating the wastewater through a treatment plant in that area. An initial concept estimate was provided of $35 million for that combined scheme. The report indicated at that point in time that that $35 million contained a 30% uncertainty, because by that stage, at that stage, there was no resource consent application. There was no cultural management plan produced by mana whenua in that area, and obviously going forward in terms of constructing the area, the cost of CPI would have been unknown. So there was a 30% uncertainty along along that report. In 2017 and 18, at the end of 2017, early 2018, a resource consent was finally granted. But before that, in the draft annual plan on 2017-18, it was around March 2017, a proposed estimate, was provided to the community, an update given to the community, and that indicated roughly what the cost would have been on the basis of the concept design. Then the consent was issued in 2018, and the cultural management plan developed by Ngāti Pikiao informed those resource consent conditions. For example, it informed the way pretreatment was going to be applied, how the pipelines were to be installed, was going to be cultural monitoring on site, where the treatment plant was to be located, access to the treatment plant, cultural inductions, archaeological monitoring, and so on. And all this embedded into the resource consent. On the basis of the costs at that point in time on the resource consent, the cost was roughly indicated to be around about $49 million plus. In 2020, we started approaching back the strategy group, which includes the ministers, Ministry of the Environment, and we have said, well, the allocation made by the Crown onto the scheme is way below its 50% contribution, because the contribution is meant to be on the actual cost, noting that all earlier schemes completed in Okareka, in Hamurama, in East Rotoiti, West Rotoiti, Brunswick area, and so on, the Crown's contributions from the deed was established at the end of the project, when the actual cost was known. The initial allocation for this project was allocated on the basis of the concept estimate before the actual cost was known. So as from 2020, once we knew the resource consent conditions and the new requirements for implementation, we went back to the strategy group and we started a process to say, well, the $11.5 million we have allocated for that scheme is insufficient. It should be at least $21.5 million as per the intent and objectives of the scheme. The strategy group considered that from August 2020 until May 2021, and made a number of resolutions, and those resolutions holistically accepted and recommended to the minister that a funding rebalance needs to be allocated, so the scheme should receive 50% of the contribution from the Crown. Excuse me. Especially the strategy group's resolutions in May 2021, which came after a number of the previous resolutions, gave the Rotorua Lakes Council the confidence to accept a contract price to finish the East Rotoiti projects. Knowing that the strategy group agreed to the resolutions and made recommendations to the minister to reallocate funds into the project scheme $10 million, they then gave us the confidence to recommend to this council accepting a contract for progressing the project. That was the foundation of progressing the project. Following a long process of interactions with the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Environment asked us for an extensive input and information set to demonstrate why the cost changes came from 2014 to 2020, what were the drivers behind that. And we have provided them with all the information they required in terms of the resource consent conditions issued by the Regional Council, the cultural management plan, and the stringent requirements to comply with the resource consent conditions and the effects of inflation during that period of time. The Treasury and the Ministry of Environment Finance Division accepted all its costs, justifications. Here, can I have some water, please? And in late August 2022, the Minister confirmed to us in writing that he has agreed to transfer unused money from land incentives programs that were sitting into Bay of Plenty Regional Council's allocation into the East Rotorua to redress the imbalance of the funding. Sorry, thank you. The Minister, in communicating that decision to us, noted that he was keen for the land incentive programs to proceed because they derive nutrient reductions to the lake, and that the parties will work collaboratively to find ways to reimburse the land incentives when the money was required, at the level and the timing that was required. Our mayor and our council and all the partners in the strategy group have provided the minister with that kind of those assurances that the parties agree that they will work collaboratively to reimburse the land incentives when the time comes. So the minister's decision was confirmed in early December 2022, and we progressed on that basis, that the partners in the strategy group will work together to identify when land incentives funding would be required, what kind of funding would be required, and at what rate of investment would be required, and the instrument through which that would happen. Then suddenly in May 2023, early May 23, the minister wrote another letter to us to say, well, I'm advising you that I have reversed my decision. I no longer agree to the transfer of the $10 million from land incentives into the East Rotorua scheme because I'm not satisfied that the land incentive schemes will be appropriately funded to achieve its objectives. Mayor Tapsell, in my opinion, responded, urgently to the minister, seeking clarifications on the basis of his decision, since he received all the assurances he needed between August and December the previous year. What has driven those decisions? We have not received a response from the minister yet. On June 23rd, the strategy group also has agreed to instruct the chair of the strategy group to work with the partners to develop a collective position and collectively address the minister in that kind of direction. Noting that on June 23rd, the Bay of Plenty Regional Council reported that the progress for the land incentive schemes is slowed down, and it is highly unlikely they will need any funding for the next foreseeable few years for the land incentives programs. So the situation remains that the minister has not rescinded his May decision yet, despite of the mayor's letter. So what does that mean? It means that in rough order, level, the scheme initially was invented, it was proposed in 2014 with a cost of $35 million per 30% uncertainty. By 2018, the cultural management plan conditions, created a new cost framework of about $49 million or in that area. tenders, and the market costs, tenders were progressed, and then the total market cost, including CPI, indicated the cost would be about $53 million in total. Those reports were reported to the Council in June 2021, and we engaged into the contract to complete the project on the foundation that the Minister was urged by the strategy group to fund that Crown funding. If you look into, in rough water, what are the variances between the initial concept of 2014 and the current costs, you find approximately 70% of this difference relates to the resource consent conditions and the cultural management plan requirements in that respect, and about 30% relate to the cost of goods price indices, the CPI indices between 2014 and 2022. Again, it's quite important to note that there is a split between East Rotoiti and Rotoma. Rotoma costs about $10 million and Rotoiti about $43 million. And the East Rotoiti is funded by the Crown, but not a Rotoma scheme. Because the Rotoma scheme is supported by the Ministry of Health. Funding support provided to the whole scheme until now comprises the Crown, as it is at the moment, $11.5 million, Beoplan, the Regional Council, $8.5 million, Ministry of Health, $4.5 million, and Rotorua Lakes Council's standing approach to support of $1,500 per property has been there since 2005, about $1.1 million. So it's a total subsidy about $25 to $26 million available to the scheme, and therefore leaves a net funding there net funding gap. Now, I noted earlier that in terms of the Crown deeds, the Crown deed fund should not be $11.5 million, it should be $21.5 million. That's $10 million gap. Because 50% of the $43 million for East Rotoiti is $21.5 million. And that's why that was the foundation of our business case, and that was the foundation of the minister had agreed to, and the strategy group resolution supported. And that's where we were. So the question arises then as to, so what's happening now? And the question is that we continue to have some cost pressures, as noted earlier, in recent 12 or 18 months' time, high lakes levels are posing a significant cost burden onto the scheme, because every installation at the moment we do has to be dewatered. And you see in the report you have in front of you a picture which shows that every installation is sheet piling and dewatering to make sure that we're able to install it. So these are additional costs. We've got Whenua Maori issues, and a lot of the lands down there belongs to multiple Maori landowners. Some of the owners cannot be found. There are Maori court records to be reconciled. There are consents to be made where utilities and services have to be located. So we're incurring additional delay costs and legal costs for that. We still got unresolved the issue of the marae systems. There are 7 marae that need to be catered with a new system. And we have some discussions with the relevant marae trust at the moment whether the systems should be catering for the peak demand, when you have a tiny or the average demand. Depend what the outcome is going to be, then obviously there will be additional costs if you go for peak demand. Now, there are risks. Because of these cost pressures, the total cost may climb up to $56 million. Now, without Crown funding, that means a net cost of $30 million to be borne by that local community, 770 properties. In terms of your current funding plan, that $30 million needs to be paid by that local community, which is mainly low income population. Now, the next actions and decisions is that the partners in the strategy group need to adopt a collective position and address the Crown to that. At the moment, only the mayor strongly referred to the Crown and questioned his rationale for that. The strategy group has not done that yet. Our next long-term plan needs to consider an approach to that, because obviously you do need to be able to decide as to what you're going to do, how you're going to structure that net costs and allocate it to a targeted rate for the July to 24 period. LTP needs to consider also whether you as elected members want to revisit the historical $1,500 per property you provided as support to the schemes in light of current costs after 20 years. And again, I don't have no view about it. It's a funding and policy decision elected members have to do. And I'm pretty sure the same consideration will apply with Tarawera at some point in time. And obviously unknown is the Three Waters reforms and effects. If the Three Waters reforms go ahead, obviously any debt related to these projects will be transferred to the new entities, but this depends on the outcome of the elections, government decisions, and so on. So these are the areas where we are at this point in time, and I hope that gives you a little bit of an appreciation and context as to where we are with it. It's unfortunate that we have to encounter those reversals of decisions. However, that's where we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Stavros. That was a comprehensive summary of the process for the sewerage scheme so far, and we appreciate the time and the effort that's taken to go into putting that together for us. Yes, we look forward to the collective position from the stakeholders group as well. I'm just aware that we are really limited for time, councillors, and there won't be much time for questioning. I'm sorry about that. There will be further opportunities to address this, though, as more information comes to light around the position of the strategy group, and also as we go into our long-term discussions. I just wanted to ask Her Worship if she had any comments, though, considering your involvement in this.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. The councillors will be aware through the letters that I have also forwarded to you, the urgency of which I responded to Minister Parker on his decision to reverse what was previously a commitment. You can see the significant impact that this will have on our community. Quite frankly, it will drown that community in debt. It's unfair and unnecessary, and we are still awaiting a response. I have not even had a response. I also then forwarded this to Minister McAnulty, asking for his support as Minister of Local Government, given that this significantly impacts us as a council organisation and also doesn't honour the direction that the government is wishing to take in terms of Three Waters and also co-governance. I do want to thank Stavros for his advice and support through this time, but as noted, as a collective group, the Te Rotorua Lakes Strategy Group is going to be responding back to the Minister as a group. This letter was from Minister Parker confirming that he will no longer meet that commitment was sent at the start of May. I don't want to wait any longer, so we'll continue that work with urgency, and I look forward to providing an update with you. In the meantime, we will continue to advocate for that community and also the wider Rotorua ratepayers that may have to pick up the bill of $10 million because of this reversal of decision from the Minister. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Worship, and I apologise that there isn't enough time to discuss this further.
I just wanted a seeking point of clarification, that's all.
Yes, please do.
Just for Stavros, in one of the last slides there, did you say there were 770 odd residents or homes that would be paying, what, $30 million? Thank you. Well, no thank you, but thank you.
Yes, this is a significant matter, and there is still more water to go under the bridge, and we await further updates on what's happening with the strategy group, and we will update the councillors as well. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. I'd just like to acknowledge and thank Her Worship the Mayor and you, Madam Chair, for bringing this matter up, which I've asked for. My only concern is, unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into further detail because there are lots of questions, not only on the Rotorua sewage scheme, but in this whole presentation, and I regret that we don't have much more time. One of the things I hope in future we will be examining more closely is what's actually caused the fission between the Minister or the Ministry and us, that we've lost $10 million. I find that that's something we are going to have to pay a lot greater detail at future meetings, and I hope that we can come up with some answers to, one, address the actual issue, but also reassure people such as Tarawera that in future that we can actually deliver a scheme on time and on budget that we seem to have some issues on at the moment. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor O'Brien, for your concerns and for raising those points for us today. I'd just like to thank Stavros and Eric for their time and putting together these two presentations in addition to the extensive report. You're right, Councillor O'Brien, there was a lot of information today, and it's unfortunate that we are pressed for time considering our other commitments for the rest of the day. So thank you, gentlemen, for your report, and our condolences on Brendan's passing, and our thoughts are with you. Thank you for your time. I'd like to now move on, please, to the confidential items to be released. They're on page 27 of your agenda.
Moved.
Moved that the confidential items to be released be received. Councillor Waru and Councillor Wang seconders. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Una has said that we can take the report as read. Are there any points of clarification from the councillors? Any questions?
No, we're just releasing it for public, right?
Yeah, we're just releasing them to the
Moved.
public. Yeah. Great. Well, in that case, we will thank you for preparing that for us, Una, and we will now move on to close the meeting. Thank you for your time. I'd like to invite Councillor Lee to close with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, the priestly blessing in Hebrew. Yeh veraka, ve'esh miraka, ve'ya Yehovah paniv, elika vik hanuka. Yisa Yehovah panav elika, ve'yasim lika shalom. May Yehovah bless you and keep you. May Yehovah make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May Yehovah turn his face towards you and give you peace. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Lee, and I declare the meeting closed. Kia ora.